Imagine a world imprisoned in ice. Across endless plains, winter winds descended from the north, sweeping the land like blades of frozen steel. A heavy grey sky pressed down, snow lay in thick layers, and the cold cut into flesh without mercy. There were no cities, no houses, no technology to ward off the harshness. Humanity had only bare hands, stone tools, and an intelligence unshaped by any school. In such a setting, a single night without shelter could extinguish life. Yet there was a human species that not only survived, but sustained communities, raised generations, and left footprints across the frozen landscapes of Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. This was Neanderthal, often portrayed as symbols of primitiveness. Their reality was far more complex. Neanderthals did not merely hunt. They used stone, bone, wood, and hide to create protective structures. They chose caves aligned with sunlight, built wind-resistant huts, and kept flames alive through the long winters. Their shelters were not fragile refuges, but survival architectures where fire, animal skins, and knowledge formed the boundary between life and death. The question arises, how? In such an ice-bound world, could an ancient human species become architects of nature? And why were their techniques seemingly simple, so refined that they still astonish modern science? Prepare to step into the story. A journey that takes us back to the Ice Age, where deep caves, mammoth-bone huts, and ancient hearths reveal a hidden truth. Neanderthals were not accidental survivors, but masters of adaptation in extreme cold. But first, we must look back to the earlier stages of human development, millions of years earlier, when dense forests still blanketed the slopes and valleys like a green carpet. The ancestors of humankind had not yet built houses or mastered fire, yet they had begun to walk upright on two legs. Australopithecus, small in frame but agile, left the thick canopies, setting its feet upon the open savanna, where wind brushed through grasses and unfiltered sunlight touched the ground. Upright walking not only expanded sightlines for detecting predators or herds, but also allowed the carrying of gathered fruits and plants back to temporary shelters under trees, rock outcrops, or fallen trunks. They had not yet mastered fire, nor crafted refined tools, but the instinct to seek shelter was already clear. Shallow rock alcoves, fallen trees, or dense thickets served as resting places against rain, sun, and predators. Seasonal movements following water sources or small herds gradually shaped a spatial awareness, the ability to remember landscapes and to anticipate environments. Every step upon the savanna was not just physical movement, but an act of survival, laying the foundations for the earliest human intelligence where the mind first began linking environment, food, and shelter, preparing for greater strides in shaping living spaces. Across hundreds of thousands of years, on the hardened soils of the savanna and along riverbanks, Homo habilis appeared, marking a decisive turning point, the creation of stone tools. These were flakes and shards, chipped to reveal sharp edges, capable of slicing flesh, splitting marrow from bone, trimming branches, or breaking wood into smaller pieces. Tools that seemed simple unlocked the ability to exploit new sources of food, turning carcasses into meals, and transforming small hands into instruments far more powerful. Homo habilis did not yet build complex dwellings, but it relied on cliff overhangs, natural rock shelters, or clusters of stones as temporary refuge. And within those shelters, the earliest traces of fire began to appear, the red glow, the fragile warmth in the dark, protecting against predators while making food easier to digest. Next came Homo erectus, advancing a great step in the evolutionary journey, with taller bodies, sturdy legs, and balanced musculature. They could move farther and faster, expanding their range from Africa into Eurasia. More importantly, Homo erectus learned to control fire in a stable way, making it the center of daily life. The hearth was not only a source of warmth, but also the nucleus of gathering, tool-making, and food sharing. Around fire, the earliest wooden posts, driven into the ground, combined with stone windbreaks, began to appear. They chose sunny slopes near water sources, arranged stones around hearths to block wind and retain heat. Each detail marked the beginnings of the art of constructing shelters, a foundational knowledge that Neanderthals would later refine into sophisticated techniques, resilient enough to withstand even the most brutal winters of the Ice Age. Homo heidelbergensis, appearing in Europe and Western Asia between 600,000 and 200,000 years ago, were the first true dwellers to face the freezing winters of the early Ice Age. They no longer relied merely on the accidents of landscape, but began to refine shelter-building techniques. Caves were not chosen at random, but through careful observation, entrances oriented away from prevailing winds, locations close to water yet high enough to avoid floods, and cliffs that could shield against falling snow. Large stones were rolled into place, forming natural barriers at cave mouths, creating windbreaks and trapping heat within. Alongside this, Homo heidelbergensis began to exploit wood and hides as supplementary materials. Wooden posts at cave entrances supported animal skins, transforming the space into a primitive layer of insulation. Floors could be covered with dry grasses or leaves to reduce heat loss to the frozen ground. Around the hearth, living space was organized with intent. Cooking areas, tool-making zones, resting places, and food storage corners. The hearth was more than fire, it was the heart of social life, turning shelter into a structured system rather than a mere temporary refuge. These advances laid the direct foundation for the Neanderthals. From the combination of caves, stone windbreaks, wooden frameworks, and hide coverings, Homo heidelbergensis paved the way for stronger constructions, mammoth-bone huts, stone walls, and layered insulation that Neanderthals would later perfect, transforming shelter into a fortress against the fiercest cold of the Ice Age. Looking back through time, the human journey unfolds as an unbroken chain of links, from the tentative first steps of Australopithecus across the grasslands to Homo habilis grasping a flaked stone, from the glowing hearth of Homo erectus in the forest night to the ordered warmth of Homo heidelbergensis. Caves. Each stage was a classroom of nature, forcing early humans to experiment, fail, and adapt. Tools became sharper and more varied. Fire shifted from chance spark to controlled flame. Shelters evolved from simple rock overhangs to reinforced structures of wood, stone, and hide. None of this was accidental. It was the distilled result of millions of years of observing environments, memorizing seasonal rhythms, testing materials, and drawing survival lessons from each harsh winter. And then, from this long foundation, the Neanderthals emerged as the pinnacle of prehistoric ingenuity. They not only mastered fire and built shelters, but transformed caves into fortresses against snowstorms, erected hide roofs over mammoth-bone frames, and aligned their rhythms with the great herds of the plains. All the legacies before them had prepared their rye so that when the Ice Age descended, Neanderthals stood as true architects of survival in the extreme cold. In popular imagination, Neanderthals are often confined to the image of shadowy figures huddled against the damp walls of caves. Cave dwellers, that label has taken deep root in modern consciousness, as if their entire existence was bound only to limestone and darkness. Yet the archaeology of the 20th and 21st centuries has redrawn a different picture, far broader, far more complex. Caves were indeed familiar refuges, safe, stable, easy to defend. But they were only one element in a varied survival strategy. Beyond the stone walls, on windswept plains, archaeological traces record outdoor structures, circles of mammoth bones, hide-covered shelters, and stone windbreak walls. These were durable, organized constructions, used over long periods, evidence that Neanderthals created flexible living spaces, adapted to both season and terrain. More than temporary shelters, these structures reveal a grasp of climate patterns, the ability to choose locations according to wind, water, and food sources, and a capacity for group coordination in both construction and maintenance. This overturns an enduring prejudice. Neanderthals were not passive occupants of dark caves. They were prehistoric architects, skillfully exploiting available materials, from the massive bones of hunted animals to the stones scattered across the steppe to raise shelters capable of resisting glacial cold. They stepped out of cavern shadows, actively shaping roofs and walls in barren landscapes, building environments suited to shifting seasons and natural conditions, and in doing so, sustained their survival across tens of thousands of harsh years. Each outdoor structure testified to abstract thought, calculating height, coverage, even wind direction, markers of foresight and creativity beyond mere necessity. Viewed this way, the old image of Neanderthals shrinking into darkness appears to narrow. Open spaces, where winds swept relentlessly across the grasslands, were also stages of refinement and skill. Traces of outdoor architecture highlight their ability to plan, coordinate, and adapt to hostile climates. Circles of mammoth bones, stone windbreaks, and hide-covered tents did more than shield bodies. They preserved rhythm of life, from hunting to communal activity, enabling groups to endure and transmit knowledge across generations. The architectural horizon of the Neanderthals thus expanded far beyond earlier imagination, showing that they did not simply react to the environment, but deliberately shaped it to secure long-term survival. Archaeology has left striking evidence that Neanderthals did not merely hide within stone. On the frozen plains of Moldova, researchers uncovered enormous circles of mammoth bones. Hundreds of leg bones, ribs, and tusks were arranged into rings, forming arched frameworks later draped with animal hides to create tents. Inside ash layers, fragments of stone tools, and charred animal bones revealed prolonged habitation shelters strong enough to protect entire groups through the long winter. These mammoth bone tents were not crude improvisations. They reflected close observation of environment and technical calculation, the height of the arch, the span of coverage, the orientation of the entrance to catch sunlight while minimizing crosswinds. Nor was this limited to Moldova. Across Europe and Central Asia, other sites preserved traces of stone windbreak walls. These low, crescent-shaped barriers were built around hearths. Winter winds were blocked, flames burned steadier, and a pocket of warmth emerged in the midst of the freezing steppe. Windbreak walls testify to close group cooperation, each stone transported, placed, and angled to optimize protection. Such structures transformed open plains into controlled microenvironments, sustaining heat and shielding food and tools from frost. These discoveries reveal that Neanderthals did not merely adapt to what nature provided. They actively reshaped living space. Caves, mammoth-bone tents, and stone windbreak siege type of construction matched to climate, terrain, and survival need. The choice of site, the design of structure, the blending of materials, stone, bone, hide, or a shawl, reflect a strategic mindset capable of prediction and response to severe weather. Together, these elements form the image of Neanderthals as prehistoric architects, inventive, adaptive, balancing survival with environmental mastery. Leaving behind enduring monuments to technical intelligence and resilience across tens of thousands of years, Neanderthals did not allow their survival to depend on a single form of shelter. They observed the terrain, attuned themselves to climate, and created different living spaces for different seasons, each choice reflecting a sophisticated strategic mindset. Shelter was not merely a refuge, but a tool to sustain rhythm of life, to safeguard food, and to organize hunting or food preparation. During the frozen winters of the Eurasian steppe, when cutting winds and heavy snow dominated the land, mammoth-bone tents draped with animal hides became fortresses against the cold. Massive bone frames withstood blizzards, thick hides preserved heat, and fires within turned these structures into warm oases amid white expanses of ice. Inside, traces of ash, charred animal bones, and fragments of stone tools reveal continuous activity from cooking to tool-making. The size and form of these shelters point to tight group cooperation. Every bone and hide was carefully chosen and positioned to ensure both strength and practicality on open plains, where no mountains or cliffs offered protection. Stone windbreak walls were erected around hearths. The shifting wind was deflected, fire burned steadily, and a temporary living zone emerged well suited to seasonal hunting expeditions. This strategy was not only a means of guarding bodies against the cold, but also a way to create a localized microclimate, sufficient to preserve warmth and dryness for food, tools, and materials. Constructing such windbreaks required calculation of wind direction, selection of suitable stone, and collective labor, proving the Neanderthals' ability to plan and coordinate at the community level in warmer conditions. Caves became another choice, stable, safe, and requiring little construction. Seasonal cycles of movement thus always coincided with changes in shelter type, reflecting an adaptive strategy that was active rather than passive. Caves were carefully selected, often close to water sources and vantage points, allowing groups to survive securely while still maintaining easy access to hunting and foraging grounds. This flexibility shows that Neanderthals understood the relationship between architecture and environment. They knew when durable tents were needed to resist ice, when temporary structures were sufficient for seasonal hunts, and when nature itself could provide protection in the form of caves or ravines. Each construction was the result of careful observation, technical calculation, and communal cooperation. It is evidence that Neanderthals were not merely seeking refuge, but deliberately designing living spaces to match the rhythms of the land and sky, actively exploiting and adjusting their surroundings to secure long-term existence through the severe conditions of the Ice Age. Within that frozen world, caves stood as natural fortresses where Neanderthals could find refuge from both climate and predators. They were not mere stopgaps, but vital centers of survival, anchors amid landscapes smothered in snow and ice. The first advantage of caves lay in their stable temperatures. while cold winds swept the plains outside and snow piled thick. The cave interior remained comparatively mild, less prone to daily or nightly fluctuation. This stability allowed fires to burn longer, warmth to spread more evenly, and bodies to recover from extended hunting journeys. Heat from fire and embers also dried the air, reduced risk of illness, and kept food and tools from damage by frost. By harnessing the natural insulation of caves, Neanderthals transformed these simple spaces into effective hubs of activity, where every corner was used with purpose. Fire, sleeping areas, and food preparation zones were arranged with logic, maximizing efficiency and ensuring survival. In addition, caves offered physical protection. Solid rock walls acted as natural barriers, blocking storms, hail, and nocturnal predators. With narrow entrances, a few strategically placed stones were enough for Neanderthals to control the safety of the group. Cave locations were often chosen high on slopes or along ridges, providing both wide vantage points and difficult access for predators or rival groups. The narrow entrances and natural rock formations created a defensive gate, forcing any intruder to pass through a tightly controlled path, ensuring the community inside remained secure. Beyond safety, caves also served as strategic spaces for long-term habitation. Inside, archaeologists have uncovered layers of ash, charred bones, stone tools, and accumulated deposits, evidence that communities remained tied to these spaces across generations. Caves were not merely shelters, but centers of culture and social organization. Children grew up to the crackle of fire. Tools were crafted, food was shared, and survival skills were transmitted. Layers of sediment became ecological archives, recording hunting seasons, prey species, and even climatic shifts. In this sense, caves stood as living museums of Neanderthal life, where past and present intertwined, each layer of ash telling stories of weather, hunting, and daily activity. In the survival landscape of the Ice Age, caves were pillars of security, a natural fortress that allowed Neanderthals not only to endure but to maintain communities across the harshest climatic cycles. The combination of cave architecture and careful internal organization turned these spaces into strategic anchors, where Neanderthal intelligence, skill, and resilience became tangible, ensuring survival not just for a season, but across tens of thousands of frozen years. The sediments of caves across Europe and Western Asia preserve clear traces of long-term Neanderthal presence. Within cool limestone chambers, archaeologists found dark grey ash deposits layered from repeated fires. These accumulations show that flames were continuously maintained, becoming both light and warmth at the center of community life. Fire not only illuminated the cave's depths, but also stabilized the microclimate, keeping tools, food, and flooring safe from dampness or frost. Maintaining fire over long stretches required knowledge of fuels, group coordination, an awareness of which woods and branches burned best, skills that reveal an intricate system of daily management in a hostile environment. Alongside ash were stone tools, hand axes, points, and flaked blades, many broken or discarded after use. These artifacts prove that caves were not only refuges, but also workshops, places where Neanderthal hands shaped survival instruments from hard stone cores. The layers of tools piled up through time form a technical archive, preserving a record of invention, repair, and experimentation. Thus, caves functioned as small industrial centers, where craftsmanship and knowledge of toolmaking were passed between generations. sustaining hunting, food preparation, and protection against the environment. Some caves also preserved traces of plant-based flooring, dry grass, or leaves spread across the stone surface to create insulation. This small but significant detail reflects an understanding of microclimate adjustment within shelters. Such flooring not only kept feet warm, but also preserved the cave's overall heat, reduced direct contact with cold stone, and safeguarded food and tools against moisture and bacteria. The combined use of fire, flooring, and tool-making created an intricately structured system of habitation, evidence of close observation, experimentation, and adaptation of living spaces to meet daily needs at the mouths of caves. Archaeology has revealed low stone walls built to block the wind. These barriers transformed wide open entrances into controlled gateways, helping to retain warmth inside while limiting drafts. They were often arranged in curved lines against the prevailing wind, combined with narrow passageways, creating a natural checkpoint. This shows that Neanderthals did not merely occupy caves as they found them, but deliberately modified and reshaped them into optimized living spaces, adapted to weather, wind, direction, and the needs of communal life. All these traces: ashes, tools, grass, flooring, windbreak walls compose a picture of the cave as a fortified and functional base where Neanderthal life was sustained, consolidated, and passed on through generations. Every detail, from the dark layers of ash to a single windshielding stone, stands as testimony to technical intelligence, environmental awareness, and refined survival strategies. The cave was no longer a mere temporary refuge, but a center of living, crafting, and protection, a natural fortress, both resilient and flexible, both safe and accommodating, where the rhythm of Neanderthal life unfolded in harmony with the elements through tens of thousands of years of glacial severity. In the Ice Age, caves were not just temporary roofs against snow and wind. Archaeological evidence shows they functioned as centers of communal life, where the rhythms of entire groups were bound together around fire and stone. The internal space was carefully organized. Every corner, every layer of soil held traces of daily activity, from hunting and food, processing to tool making and resting. Ash built up into thick deposits, interwoven with cracked animal bones, demonstrating that cooking and food sharing occurred regularly. The smoke and heat from fire spread across the cave, creating a stable microclimate, keeping food from freezing and protecting tools from dampness. On the ground, fragments of stone tools lay scattered, evidence of ongoing work in shaping and repairing weapons. Blades, hand axes, and arrowheads, worn or broken, revealed continuous cycles of sharpening, knapping, and repair, ensuring readiness for both hunting and defense. At some sites, wide mats of dried grass were discovered, evoking images of organized resting areas. These layers not only insulated against the cold stone floor, but also marked spatial divisions, separating food preparation zones, sleeping spaces, and the hearth. The low stone windbreaks near cave entrances transformed rough spaces into stable interiors, maintaining warmth while shielding groups from winter winds and predators. The placement of these walls was far from arbitrary. Direction, height, and distance were calculated to maximize wind protection without obstructing movement or the field of view. Together, these details form a vivid picture. The cave was a hub where essential activities converged at crafting, resting, guarding the fire, and maintaining safety. It was not a mere shelter from the cold, but a social foundation, where Neanderthal communities nurtured existence under a harsh climate. Every layer of ash, every splintered bone, every stone wall tells of group coordination, survival, intelligence, and the capacity to organize space according to practical needs. The cave became a natural fortress where architecture, daily life, and survival strategies fused, ensuring that communities preserved rhythms, skills, and accumulated knowledge across generations. Despite the unforgiving chill of the Ice Age, across the frozen steppe, where rock and snow stretched endlessly and no caves offered protection, Neanderthals did not remain exposed to the elements. Archaeology reveals traces of artificial structures, shelters built from wood, branches, animal hides, and even the massive frames of mammoth bones. These constructions reflect creative thought, close observation of the environment, and deep understanding of materials from rigid to flexible, from insulating to wind blocking, transforming open, barren plains into safe havens. Logs and large antlers were driven into the ground as frames. Mammoth ribs were raised into arches, then covered with thick hides or layers of dried grass. Such structures blocked the wind, retained warmth, and created a small microclimate inside the tent, sufficient for the group to maintain body heat and carry out daily life. Some shelters were further reinforced with stone walls arranged in arcs around them, shielding against the relentless northern winds. These walls not only blocked the gusts, but also stabilized the fire, keeping embers alive and flames steady, forming a communal center where food was prepared, tools repaired, and social activity continued without pause. The remaining ash deposits and fire pits revealed the presence of hearth spaces within the tents, where fire provided not only heat but also light and a focal point for group life. Hearths were usually placed at the center, carefully distanced from walls and flammable coverings, showing that Neanderthals understood both fire safety and the optimization of heat distribution. Around these hearths, half-burned animal bones, bark fragments, and dried grasses accumulated, evidence of organized routines extending over weeks or even months. These structures were more than mere shelters. They were testimony to acute observation of terrain, careful choice of tent orientation, and consideration of seasonal winds and cold. On open steppes, where weather could shift into storms within hours, a stable shelter marked the boundary between life and death. Constructing such a tent demanded close group coordination, hauling heavy bones and timber, shaping arches, stretching hides taut, and balancing the framework to withstand blizzards. Every detail reflected technical thinking, the ability to anticipate natural conditions, and a strong communal consciousness. Each action, each material chosen, aimed at securing survival. Mammoth-bone tents and windbreak shelters were therefore not temporary improvisations, but clear expressions of survival intelligence in a hostile world. They demonstrate that Neanderthals did not simply react to nature, but actively engineered their living spaces, transforming bare, frozen plains into habitable grounds for work, craft, and endurance sustained by knowledge, experience, and the coordinated strength of the community. On the Eastern European plains, in Moldova, archaeology uncovered one of the most striking testaments to Neanderthal construction. Here, amid traces of ice-aged frost, stood a semi-spherical structure built from the colossal bones of mammoths. It was not only a shelter, but a vivid monument to survival, intelligence, and architectural skill in an unforgiving climate. Massive ribs were raised and interlocked into arched frameworks, crossing like a natural dome, creating a weight-bearing structure of remarkable stability. Over this skeleton, Thick animal hides were stretched to form a windproof membrane, while dried grass and moss was stuffed into gaps, turning the entire dwelling into a compact, insulated chamber, capable of holding warmth through ferocious snowstorms. Inside, analysis of charcoal remains shows that fires once burned steadily, providing both light and heat for daily life, while enabling cooking, drying of provisions, and tool production. Closer study reveals that this was no temporary improvisation. It was a form of portable yet durable architecture, suited to lives bound to wide-open plains. Neanderthals transported heavy bones, erected arched frames, stretched coverings, and packed moss and grasses into seams, all of which display refined cooperation and deep material knowledge. Moldova stands as proof that Neanderthals fully exploited the mammoth, not only as a source of food and raw materials, but as pillars, walls, and insulation, transforming the remains of giants into shelters against the Ice Age. Those shelters were marks of intelligence, showing that adaptation did not end with mere refuge, but had reached the level of creating artificial architecture, capable of resisting the harsh force of the Ice Age. Every detail of their construction, from the orientation of the bones, the spacing of posts, to the way insulating materials were packed, reflected careful calculation and environmental understanding. The mammoth-bone dwellings at Moldova prove that Neanderthals were not merely reacting to nature, but actively shaping their living spaces, transforming frozen steppes into lands where cooking, resting, and community life could unfold. They stand as evidence of survival, intelligence, and technical ability far beyond the old notion of a species, confined only to caves at many open-air sites. Archaeology has also revealed semicircular stone rings surrounding the remains of hearths. Stones were carefully chosen and arranged in even arcs, shielding flames against the sweeping winds of the steppe. These were not improvised fires, but deliberate designs, intended to keep flames steady, and element of survival in the frigid atmosphere of the Ice Age. The layout of these walls reflects an understanding of wind, direction, seasonal intensity, and the behavior of fire, enabling small groups on vast plains to maintain warmth, cook food, and protect tools. The stone windbreaks were not tall, but high enough to create a zone of calm air. The semicircular design allowed air to enter from a narrow opening, sustaining the fire without scattering ashes. Through their curved form, the stones dispersed wind pressure, reducing its direct force on the hearth, while leaving gaps sufficient for smoke to escape without draining heat. Around them, traces of charcoal and burnt bone fragments reveal places where groups once gathered, sharing warmth, preparing food, and working on tools. The placement of these walls also allowed for auxiliary spaces near the fire, spots for food, tools, and daily materials, all organized for convenience in the harsh environment. These simple stone walls were proof of a familiar principle of construction: living spaces adapted to severe climates. No grand architecture was needed, just a few strategically placed stones were enough to turn a frozen plain into a zone of survival. The subtlety lay in the intent. Every stone, every curve served a purpose: blocking wind, conserving heat, directing airflow, and protecting the flame. Together, they sustained the rhythm of community life. What appears simple was, in truth, the outcome of long observation, trial, and accumulated experience, representing a form of survival architecture where Neanderthal intelligence intertwined with the forces and patterns of a harsh natural world. One important feature of these outdoor shelters was their mobility. In the Ice Age environment, as great herds migrated across frozen steppes, survival depended on following the food. Shelters had to adapt to this movement, protecting the group while ensuring that hunting, gathering, and tool-making could continue without interruption. Mammoth bones, wooden posts, and large branches could be erected, then dismantled after a hunting season ended. The hides stretched over the frames were folded, carried, and reused elsewhere, turning them into portable materials ready to be reassembled at new locations. Even the semicircular stone windbreaks were built from stones found on site, avoiding heavy transport and reflecting practical intelligence in construction choices. Using local materials reduced labor while guaranteeing instant adaptability to terrain and prevailing winds at each stop. Thanks to this, the wind shelters and bone shelters were not fixed constructions, but mobile architecture sturdy enough to withstand snowstorms, yet flexible enough to move with the rhythm of migration. These tents embodied a complex survival system, a shelter combined with a hearth, a sleeping area, a tool-making zone, and a place for food storage. The ability to dismantle and reuse materials allowed Neanderthals to establish temporary yet efficient living sites close to water sources, near the pathways of game, and safe enough from predators. This reflected a strategic mindset, not merely building a dwelling, but organizing the entire living space in tune with the ecological pulse of the frozen steppe. Each portable shelter stood as evidence of the ability to anticipate weather, evaluate terrain, and coordinate group efforts from raising frames, stretching hides, and stuffing grasses to maintaining fire within. Such flexibility showed that Neanderthals were not passive in the face of harsh nature, but actively shaped their living environment, synchronizing with ecological cycles and optimizing every resource to sustain their communities through the long, relentless winters of the Ice Age, amid stone wind, beneath mammoth-bone frames covered in hides, or deep inside icy caves. One element was always present: fire. Fire was the heart of every shelter, the axis around which all Neanderthal life was organized. It was not only a source of heat, but the very center of survival activities, from cooking food, providing warmth, and preserving tools, to forming a social space where the community gathered and coordinated the rhythm of life. Fire brought steady warmth against the persistent cold of the Ice Age. Over its flames, hunted meat was roasted, marrow bones were exploited to the fullest, and forest roots were softened, turning into digestible energy. Fire was also used to preserve food, dry hides, process wooden tools, and ward off predators lurking in the dark. It created a safe zone around the dwelling, a space where tool-making and rest could take place, shielded from the brutal conditions outside. Traces of ash and burn, marks across many sediment layers, revealed that fires were not lit only once, but sustained continuously, guarded through nights, days, and even weeks. Maintaining a lasting fire required fuel management skills, selecting dry branches, adding small wood to keep the embers alive, knowing when to feed larger logs for a steady flame, and assigning watch over the hearth to ensure the embers did not die out. Fire placement itself was calculated, set in the tent's center for even heat, or near cave walls with wind, where smoke could escape through cracks while heat was conserved. Fire was the foundational technology of existence. It transformed a stopover into a living space, a cold cave into a fortress of warmth, a fragile tent into a dwelling strong enough to withstand a world of ice. Around the hearth, Neanderthal groups could craft tools, prepare for hunts, share food, and preserve survival knowledge. The warmth and light of fire created a community center, a hub where survival strategies, technical skills, and group coordination converged, turning the Ice Age's brutality into a habitat where prehistoric humans endured, adapted, and transmitted knowledge across generations. Fire became a silent witness to the rhythm of life, the adaptability, and the ingenuity of Neanderthals against a relentless natural world. Archaeology has left clear imprints of fire's enduring presence in Neanderthal life. Many caves in Europe and Western Asia reveal multi-layered hearths, rings of ash piled upon one another, proving that fire was maintained not just for days, but across years, even generations. Each layer of charcoal, each darkened stain on stone floors, marked a milestone of determination in mastering heat and light amidst the shadows of the Ice Age. Through these sediments, one can trace the recurring rhythm of life, the hearth lit, sustained, extinguished, and lit again, an unbroken survival cycle intertwined with the patterns of hunting, migration, and community living. Not only dry wood, Neanderthals also knew how to use the bones of large animals as fuel. When timber grew scarce across the frozen steppe, the fat within marrow and the organic residues inside bones became an effective source of combustion. Charred bone fragments found in many archaeological layers testify that animal carcasses were transformed into both food and fuel, with every available resource exploited to the fullest. The use of bone as fuel was not merely a clever technical solution, but also a reflection of foresight and planning, selecting bones rich in marrow, positioning them close to the fire to sustain heat, while at the same time controlling smoke so as not to disrupt the surrounding living space. These hearths were not random, but the stable heart of each shelter. There, heat was maintained, food was cooked, hides were dried, and thin smoke spread outward, repelling insects and predators. Fire also served as the axis of social life. Children grew up around its glow. Tools were crafted at its side, food was shared and prepared for long hunts. Each remnant of ash bore witness to the mastery of fire, decisive step that allowed Neanderthals to endure within the unforgiving world of the Ice Age. Fire warmed not only the body, but also the rhythm of life, the sense of organization, and the ability of the community to coordinate, transforming a shelter into a complete sphere of survival where intelligence, skill, and knowledge were preserved across generations. Despite the cold and the wilderness, if mammoth-bone tents, stone windbreaks, or deep caves provided the outer shell of protection, then fire was the soul that breathed life into those spaces. When these two elements combined, they formed a complete survival system, architecture keeping wind and ice at bay, fire sustaining warmth and vitality within. This union was more than sheltering technique, it was the expression of strategic thought and spatial organization, turning a hostile environment into a place where life could flow uninterrupted. A roof alone would quickly become a freezing enclosure, insufficient to shield the body. Wind seeping through cracks would strip away heat, body temperature would plummet, and survival would be impaired. A solitary fire, exposed on the steppe, would be whipped by snow-laden winds, flickering, difficult to sustain, insufficient for cooking, heating, or light. Only when fire and shelter were joined did a dwelling become a stable center, capable of extending survival across many winters. Inside caves, beneath portable tents, or behind low stone walls. The fire was placed at the center, where warmth radiated evenly, where smoke could escape without choking the space, and where the group could gather, rest, and carry out essential activities. This was the decisive point in the success of Neanderthals. They did not merely find places to hide, nor simply know how to kindle flames. They organized their living spaces so that these two elements reinforced each other, transforming the harsh environment into a miniature ecosystem where humans could eat, sleep, work, and endure within the embrace of fire and shelter. Each decision where to position the hearth, how far from cave walls or tent frames, how to arrange windbreak stones or align bone structures reflected meticulous calculation, combining observations of climate, wind, direction, and the group's migratory rhythm. When architecture and fire were united, the shelter became the center of survival, a place for preparing food, crafting tools, conserving warmth, and sustaining communal life through the long, relentless winters, an enduring proof of Neanderthal ingenuity and strategic adaptability. During the Ice Age, darkness fell earlier and lingered longer. Temperatures dropped to skin-cutting levels, and each exhaled breath formed a white plume in the thick, icy air. The ground hardened like stone, covered by a thin layer of ice and deep snow, instantly drawing warmth from the body. Bitter winds whistled through rock crevices, weaving through barriers and permeating every space. On those endless nights, merely lying exposed on the frozen ground could drain vitality. For this reason, shelters required not only walls and fire, but also a sleeping placer, warm layer between the body and the harsh cold sweeping across the frozen steppe. A windproof tent or a deep cave, without a carefully prepared sleeping surface, remained just a cold shell. Heat from the fire extended only so far, while the icy ground absorbed body warmth hour by hour. Under such conditions, creating a place that separated the body from the ground with thick layers of dry grass, leaves, or animal hides became vital for survival. Without it, even the sturdiest shelter could not sustain life through the long nights of the Ice Age. The need then went beyond simply having a roof overhead. It required insulating the body from the frozen ground. Cold seeping from beneath the body proved harsher than the biting wind outside, rendering fire nearly powerless without an insulating layer. Shelters thus needed not only to provide cover, but also to maintain warmth over time, creating a sleeping space safe enough for the body to recover during the endless night. In severe winters, the hard frozen ground became a silent threat to life. To overcome this, prehistoric humans collected dry grass, moss, and leaves, stacking them in thick layers. When compressed, the fibers and moss formed a natural mat, trapping air like a primitive insulation layer. This kept the body from direct contact with the icy surface, allowing warmth to linger longer around the resting place. This small yet decisive step paved the way for the concept of a safe sleeping surface. In freezing environments, in some excavated caves, fossilized grass layers remain preserved, interspersed between sediment layers. In certain sites, the surface of the grass bears dark burn marks, indicating it was once placed near fires or exposed to residual heat for added warmth. These remnants attest to systematic preparation. Grass was not only laid as bedding, but also periodically replaced or burned to deter pests and maintain hygiene. The delicate layers that remain provide direct evidence that, in the cold, dark Ice Age, humans had already learned to create rudimentary beds to preserve life. The function of this bedding extended beyond cushioning the body on hard stone. More importantly, grass, moss, and dry leaves created a thin layer of air, preventing the frigid ground from conducting cold directly into the body. Combined with animal hides draped over it, this bedding kept the body dry, limited moisture, and slowed heat loss through the night. This simple yet vital mechanism was one of the foundational innovations of prehistoric habitation. Large animal hides from mammoths, bison, and reindeer were processed into thick sheets and laid over the body like primitive blankets. Their dense, multi-layered fur trapped warm air close to the skin, limiting penetration of cold. Hides could be layered to block wind and maintain a stable temperature throughout the night. In many caves, cut marks and wear on animal bones show that hides were used not only for clothing but also to meet sleeping needs, forming the first human beds. Multiple hides stacked together created thick layers that could be folded or spread out, wrapping the body into a nest amid freezing nights. Dense outer fur blocked wind, while the inner hide maintained body heat. Layering large animal hides transformed the sleeping space into a naturally insulated chamber, preventing rapid heat loss during harsh Ice Age nights. Animal hides functioned not only to retain warmth, but also as natural wind. When laid flush against the ground or hung to block cracks in caves or tents, thick hides reduced drafts. The outer fur stopped wind and moisture, while the inner hide retained heat, making the sleeping space more enclosed and stable even when cold gusts blew through the night. Sleeping areas were often arranged around the hearth, positioned close enough to benefit from radiating heat, but far enough to avoid smoke or flying embers. The fire served both as a heat source and a protective boundary, deterring predators and reducing humidity within the cave. This careful positioning transformed sleeping areas into safe centers, where warmth spread evenly without danger. Some archaeological sites indicate that sleeping spaces were not arranged randomly but organized into clusters. The remaining layers of grass, animal hides, and charcoal were found in small circles, suggesting that each small group had its own sleeping area. This arrangement reflects a sense of community. Living spaces were divided into orderly sections, maintaining collective warmth while ensuring cohesion within the group. Sleeping areas were not prepared just once. Evidence shows they were reused multiple times. Prehistoric humans could sprinkle a thin layer of ash and charred fragments over old bedding to absorb moisture, deter insects, and clean the surface before adding a new layer. Archaeological remains record thin layers of ash interspersed with plant matter, indicating deliberate repetition. This represents a form of rudimentary maintenance, reflecting careful observation and the ability to sustain minimal comfort in a harsh environment. Carefully prepared sleeping areas transformed a cold cave or a makeshift animal hide tent into a fully functional living space. They were no longer merely shelters from wind and rain, but environments capable of sustaining life through long, freezing nights. The presence of these warm sleeping places marked the transition from temporary refuge to an organized survival space. Sleeping arrangements did more than provide temporary cover. They played a decisive role in preserving life. A dry, insulated bedding layer combined with thick coverings allowed the body to recover after long days of hunting and travel, prevented heat loss overnight, and reduced the risk of hypothermia. This ensured that physical strength was restored, daily rhythms were maintained, and the ability to endure the harsh winters of the Ice Age was significantly enhanced. Traces of sleeping areas reveal not only simple existence, but also the sophistication of Neanderthal domestic planning. Attention to detail from bedding layers to coverings and spatial arrangement demonstrates that their survival skills went far beyond crude sheltering. This provides clear evidence that Neanderthals had developed a comprehensive adaptive system, capable of coping with extreme climates and sustaining their community across generations. Neanderthal sleeping areas did not resemble modern beds in form, but their function was similar, separating the body from the frozen ground, retaining heat with multiple layers of animal hides, and creating a comfortable resting space under harsh conditions in the cold of the Ice Age. These sleeping arrangements were the blankets and mattresses of prehistoric life, a simple yet vital innovation that ensured the survival of the community. They are not merely remnants of sleeping spots, but an integral part of the heritage of survival intelligence. Each layer of grass, hide, or ash spread across the ground reflects systematic planning. In the freezing nights of the Ice Age, these sleeping spaces became evidence of the Neanderthals' calculated, organized approach to preserving life in the harshest environments. Neanderthals did not place their shelters haphazardly. Archaeological evidence shows that groups often chose south-facing slopes, which received more sunlight and reduced prolonged exposure to the Ice Age's biting cold. On these slopes, snow melted faster, and the ground remained drier, creating conditions favorable for erecting tents and maintaining a stable hearth. Selecting slope orientation and gradient not only helped regulate temperatures within shelters, but also reduced the risk of flooding from melting snow. Keeping bedding layers of grass, moss, or temporary flooring dry and convenient for daily living and tool production. Another ideal location was at forest edges. These sites provided both wood for fuel and tent frames while offering a clear view of the open steppe, the main hunting grounds for large animals such as mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, or bison. Living at the boundary between two environments allowed Neanderthals easy access to both essential materials and food. Areas near forests also created small microclimates. Trees blocked the wind, reducing the direct chill from the open steppe, while providing shade during the brief summer months, allowing seasonal flexibility in daily life. Additionally, location choices favored water sources that did not completely freeze. Evidence from open-air camps often shows proximity to streams or small rivers, where flowing water remained accessible even in icy winters. These water sources served not only for drinking and cooking, but also for moistening hides, cleaning tools, and assisting in the production of items made from leather, wood, or bone. Positioning shelters near water reflects strategic planning, minimizing risk and optimizing energy expenditure in a harsh environment. This repeated selection of terrain across generations indicates that Neanderthals followed seasonal strategies, moving with herds of animals, setting up tents on open plains during the hunting season, then returning to caves or sun-exposed slopes when the harsh winter arrived. This cycle was not random, but the result of long-term observation, memorizing the migration patterns of prey, the freezing rhythms of rivers and streams, and the seasonal changes of climate. It was this alignment with natural cycles that allowed them to survive sustainably through hundreds of thousands of years of the Ice Age, transforming the cold, open steppe into an organized survival space where knowledge, experience, and skills were passed from one generation to the next. Within the cyclical rhythms of the Ice Age, Neanderthals did not merely react to the environment. They harnessed seasonal patterns to organize their living spaces, turning climatic changes into factors that regulated daily life. They observed sunlight, wind direction, terrain slope, and the locations of water sources to make optimal choices for each season. Each stage of hunting or gathering food In summer, when the grasslands expanded and herds migrated across the frozen steppe, they erected light, mobile tents. Constructed from wooden frames and covered with animal hides, these shelters could be quickly set up and dismantled, allowing the group to follow the traces of food sources continuously. These tents were not merely temporary refuges. They served as activity centers where food was processed, tools were maintained, and the group could rest after long hunting trips. This nomadic architecture was closely linked to short-term hunting and foraging rhythms, while utilizing available materials with hides and bones to create shelters that were both durable and flexible, meeting the demands of continuous mobility. When winter arrived, with harsh northern winds and heavy snow covering the ground, choices changed. Caves became fixed strongholds, natural shelters, with more stable temperatures than the open air and large enough to maintain fire for months. These caves were reinforced with stone walls, bedding of dry grass, and even animal hide panels, transforming them into fortresses against the cold. Inside, spaces were clearly organized. Central hearths provided heat. Sleeping areas were arranged. Tools were crafted, and food was stored, all reflecting a tightly coordinated survival strategy that maximized natural protection and spatial engineering skills. The alternation between mobile summer tents and fixed winter caves demonstrates a clear strategy, not only surviving the harsh climate, but also adapting rhythmically to the ecological cycle, moving when necessary and taking shelter when required. This cycle was repeated over generations, becoming a familiar rhythm in which knowledge of hunting seasons, shelter locations, and the maintenance of fire, food, and tools was transmitted. By aligning with natural cycles, combining careful observation with organizational skill, Neanderthals maintained stable populations for hundreds of thousands of years, despite the extreme fluctuations of the Ice Age, turning frozen steppes and caves into miniature ecosystems, capable of supporting life and growth. Neanderthal shelters were not merely resting spots. They were integral to hunting and migration strategies. Groups often selected camp locations with wide visibility, near known pathways of large animal herds. A tent or hearth positioned correctly could serve as a base for an entire hunting season, while providing a strategic advantage to monitor prey and anticipate dangers from predators or weather changes. Camps near forest edges, slopes, or small hills also took advantage of natural microclimates. Trees blocked the wind. The ground remained dry, and sunlight reduced cold exposure, supporting fire maintenance and daily activities. When mammoths, bison, or wild horses migrated across the steppe, Neanderthals followed, establishing mobile temporary camps along the route. Lightweight animal hide tents and stone windbreaks served not only as shelters but also as operational bases for hunting, where bones, hides, and meat could be processed on site. Central hearths retained heat and created communal activity points where tools were made. Meat was shared, and information about threats or prey was exchanged. Each camp location was carefully chosen based on proximity to water, visibility, wind direction, and access to surrounding materials, reflecting Neanderthals' meticulous observation and environmental management skills. Conversely, during the long winter, when large animals moved little and food sources became scarce, shelters were closely tied to storage and fortification. Caves or sturdy bone tents became central hubs, from which hunting was conducted within a smaller radius or reserved food supplies were accessed. Fixed shelters were arranged to optimize temperature, maintain fire over long periods, protect the group from blizzards, and store food, tools, or animal hides. These caves and reinforced structures became survival centers, where all activities resting, cooking, tool-making, and resource management were concentrated, creating a miniature ecosystem aligned with seasonal cycles. This integration shows that shelters were not separate from survival activities, but part of an overall strategy, choosing the right terrain, erecting the appropriate type of shelter, and adjusting according to the movement of prey. In this way, Neanderthals had not only a roof over their heads, but also a sophisticated ecological map, linking their dwellings to the movements of animals, maximizing natural resources, and sustaining their existence across harsh winters, demonstrating exceptional survival, intelligence, and spatial organization, relying not only on nature. Neanderthals also crafted tools to construct and reinforce their shelters. Archaeological remains reveal a diverse toolkit: sharp knives, hand axes, scrapers for hides, and bone awls. Each tool served a specific function in building, processing materials, and shaping living spaces, reflecting a deep understanding of the properties of each material and how to use them for maximum efficiency. Sharp knives and hand axes were used to chop wood and branches, forming frames for tents or windbreaks. Each strike was not merely to cut material, but calculated to ensure that the frame achieved the desired shape and structural stability. Scrapers processed animal hides, creating coverings that protected against rain and cold winds while retaining warmth inside the shelter. Once treated, the hides were skillfully stretched, inserted into gaps, and formed an insulating layer nearly impervious to outside conditions. Bone awls were used to pierce and sew, fastening hides to the frame or drilling holes for cords, turning raw materials into durable structures capable of withstanding wind and snow. Some tools were also used for smoothing, shaving wood or bone, ensuring that each piece fits securely and easily, demonstrating meticulous design and practice. The coordination of these tools reflects a sophisticated, technical mindset, not merely erecting a roof, but creating a stable living space capable of insulation, wind protection, and seasonal flexibility. Shelters were organized to optimize functionality. Central hearths provided heat, tools and materials were arranged efficiently, and floors or bedding were carefully positioned to retain warmth and minimize contact with the cold ground. With this versatile toolkit, Neanderthals were not just survivors, they were practical architects, transforming a harsh natural environment into a controllable space where construction and tool-making skills converged, enabling stable life over tens of thousands of years amid the extreme fluctuations of the Ice Age. 2. Transform raw materials into shelters able to withstand blizzards. Neanderthals employed precise techniques combined with specialized tools. Animal hides, once thoroughly cleaned, were stretched and pinned onto wooden frames or posts, forming a windproof shell that remained flexible enough to bear the weight of snow. Cords, stitches made from bone or thin wood, secured the hides at key points, ensuring that frames did not collapse under strong winds or heavy snowfall. Asterisk. The gaps beneath the hides and between joints were stuffed with dry grass, moss, or leaves, creating an insulating layer that retained heat inside. These actions not only made use of available materials, but also reflected a deep understanding of heat conduction, wind control, and heat retention, basic physical principles that many modern architectural designs still employ. Some archaeological sites even indicate that dry grass was arranged in multiple layers, alternating with moss, increasing insulation, preventing water infiltration from melting snow or rain, and providing a softer surface for daily activities. The combination of stretched hides, pinned frames, and packed dry grass transformed makeshift tents into stable and efficient shelters capable of surviving the long winter. Erecting a tent followed a clear sequence, constructing the frame, stretching the hides, reinforcing with cord or bone pins, stuffing, insulating material, and only then lighting the fire and arranging the living area. Each step was deliberate, not random, demonstrating that Neanderthals organized labor, delegated tasks, and maintained quality in their living spaces. This is evidence that Neanderthal shelter-building techniques were not improvised but the result of long experience and advanced technical thought, transforming simple raw materials into systems capable of resisting nature's forces while creating safe, warm, and sustainable environments for the group to survive across generations. In addition to using animal hides, bones, and dry grass, Neanderthals also exploited stone and wood to reinforce structures. Solid wooden posts were buried deep into the ground, forming load-bearing frames for tent roofs or arched structures made of mammoth bones. Each post was carefully selected, cut, and trimmed to fit precisely into the frame, ensuring maximum strength and minimizing the risk of breaking or tilting under strong winds. Stones were arranged around entrances, forming windbreak walls or stable foundations for hearth areas, while also preventing cold air from seeping in and maintaining internal temperature. Some sites even show stones arranged in grooves to stabilize wooden posts or placed under hides and bones to increase structural integrity, demonstrating Neanderthals' understanding of weight, distribution, and balance. The combination of stone and wood enhanced the stability and longevity of shelters, while reducing the risk of collapse from wind or accumulated snow on the roof. Marks from chopping, cutting, and joining stone and wood indicate that Neanderthals knew how to utilize available materials, choosing suitable positions and shapes not only for erection but also for reinforcement, increasing resistance to harsh environmental conditions. These structures were not merely temporary. They could be used across multiple winters, reflecting foresight, long-term planning, and a sophisticated understanding of materials and architecture. These techniques, combined with crafted tools, stretched hides, and stuffed insulation, created complete shelters sturdy enough for Neanderthals to survive icy winters, yet flexible enough to follow animal herds and seasonal cycles. As such, the shelters functioned both as fortresses against nature and as living centers for food preparation, tool-making, and resource storage. This system reflects an integrated technical mindset, combining diverse materials, organizing structures according to sustainable principles, and ensuring mobility when necessary, demonstrating the Neanderthals' superior intelligence and adaptability in the harsh, Ice Age environment. Neanderthal shelters were neither massive nor ornate. They were a subtle combination of stone, wood, animal bones, hides, and dry grass, creating spaces that were both sturdy and flexible, capable of withstanding the extreme cold of the Ice Age. Every detail from windbreak stone walls, mammoth-bone frames, stretched hide roofs, to insulated grass layers reflected technical thought and survival experience accumulated over generations, like an implicit manual on organizing shelters under harsh conditions. Spaces were deliberately arranged, hearths placed centrally to distribute heat evenly, tool-making areas near entrances, and grass-covered floors retaining warmth and minimizing contact with the cold. Ground all combined to form a living environment, both functional and sustainable. These structures stand as vivid proof that prehistoric intelligence did not reside in scale or grandeur, but in the capacity to observe, adapt, and transform a harsh natural environment into a safe haven. Neanderthals knew how to select shelter locations according to sunlight, wind, water sources, and lines of sight. They employed craftsmanship to reinforce tent frames, and skillfully combined diverse materials into stable systems. Such sophistication reflects not only survival intelligence, but also a form of social organization, division of labor, knowledge sharing, and transmission of experience from one generation to the next, even after hundreds of thousands of years. Neanderthal shelter building remains a precious legacy, reminding us of the power of survival intelligence in the harshest conditions on Earth. It is not only a record of how prehistoric humans withstood snowstorms, but also a reminder that observation, experimentation, and adaptation are at the core of every evolutionary advance. These shelters, with all their small yet intricate details, continue to echo as evidence of persistent, creative, and organized intellect, leaving a timeless lesson about the relationship between humans, nature, and survival architecture. Neanderthal shelters were not merely physical structures. They were living testimony to survival intelligence. From choosing suitable terrain, constructing frames from mammoth bones, reinforcing with stone and wood, stretching hides, stuffing insulating grass, to maintaining fires. Each action reflects refined observation, analysis, and improvisation in the Ice Age's harsh environment. Every decision, tent, orientation, hearth placement, tool layout, choice of materials was based on experience accumulated over generations, creating living spaces that were both flexible and sustainable. Layers of ash, grass floors, windbreak walls, and mammoth bone frames testify to the methods of learning and passing knowledge on, with each generation refining techniques and optimizing shelters according to the seasons and years. These traces prove that Neanderthals were master adapters, capable of organizing living space, planning, hunting, and migration strategies, and fully exploiting natural resources. The combination of mobile tents and fixed caves, bone frames, hides, and stone walls created a multi-layered survival system in which every element served the purpose of sustaining life. They did not merely process materials, but also accounted for wind, temperature, sunlight, and herd movement, reflection of sophisticated strategic thinking, where survival was inseparable from understanding the environment and natural cycles. The image of Neanderthals as primitive cave dwellers is a misleading myth. In reality, they possessed the skills and knowledge to sustain themselves in a frozen world. Their shelters stand as living proof of observation, learning, organization, and creativity. They offer a profound lesson in prehistoric intelligence, that intellect is measured not only by tools or language, but by the ability to transform harsh nature into a manageable environment, ensuring survival and community continuity over hundreds of thousands of years. Neanderthal shelters were more than physical constructions. They were vivid evidence of survival intelligence, where knowledge, organization, and creativity were expressed with subtlety. Choosing terrain, constructing frames from mammoth bones, reinforcing with stone and wood, stretching hides over roofs, stuffing insulating grass, positioning hearths carefully, and maintaining fires over several days all reflect a comprehensive survival strategy, combining practical skill with environmental understanding, rather than relying solely on physical strength. Every detail of the shelter demonstrates systematic thinking, hearths placed centrally to distribute heat evenly, grass-covered floors to retain body warmth, windbreak walls protecting fire and living areas, tightly stretched hide roofs to resist rain, snow, and storms, while bone and wood frames provided structural stability. The lesson from Neanderthals becomes clear when viewing the living space as a whole in harsh environments. Knowledge and organizational skill are as crucial as physical strength. The ability to observe seasons, predict herd migration, select available materials, design shelters suited to temperature, wind, and sunlight, and retain warmth from fires were all decisive factors for survival. The integration of fire, construction, and materials not only created shelters but also established a survival system, miniature ecosystem for the community, where activities from food processing, tool making, resting, to knowledge sharing were all carefully organized. These skills transcend time, reminding us that creativity, strategic thinking, and adaptability are always keys to survival, even in the Earth's harshest conditions. Neanderthal shelters are proof that prehistoric intelligence was not abstract or latent, but vividly expressed through behavior, technique, and organization, a valuable legacy demonstrating how humans transformed nature into a controllable environment, safeguarded life, and maintained communities across generations.